My son's Christmas dinner, my daughter-in-law opened the door, looked me up and down, and said, "We didn't set a place for you. This is immediate family." I drove home alone with a trunk full of wrapped gifts. 2 weeks later, I removed her husband from my will entirely. On New Year's Eve, they found out. My name is Meredith, and I'm 67 years old. I've been a widow for 4 years, since the February morning my husband Carl passed from a heart attack in his sleep, quietly, the way he'd lived. We were married 41 years. He was an engineer. I was a high school librarian for 32 of those years. Together we raised one son, our boy Owen, who grew up to be someone I thought I knew completely. After Carl died, Owen became my anchor. He called every Sunday without fail, the same way his father used to call his own mother. We had dinner together most weeks. When he married When he married his wife, I tried hard to welcome her. She was sharp and beautiful and had strong opinions about everything, including, apparently, me. She'd grown up with a mother who stayed out of her business, and she'd decided early on that I was the opposite of that. I don't think she was entirely wrong. I was involved. I wanted to be. But I was never cruel. I never showed up uninvited. I never interfered with their marriage. I helped where I could and stayed back when I wasn't needed. When they bought their house, Carl and I gave them $40,000 toward the down payment. When my daughter-in-law's car needed replacing, I co-signed the loan because her credit wasn't strong enough on its own. When my grandson Theo was born, that little boy who had Carl's exact forehead, I was there for 3 weeks helping with night feedings and laundry and cooking so my daughter-in-law could rest. That's what grandmothers do. That's what I believed family meant. Something shifted about 8 months before that Christmas. I noticed it the way you notice weather changing, not all at once but in the quality of the light. Owen's Sunday calls got shorter. When I asked about Theo, the answers were vague. "He's good, Mom. He's busy." A 4-year-old doesn't have a schedule that tight. When I mentioned coming for Thanksgiving, Owen said they were going to his wife's family in Michigan that year. Okay, I understood. But he hadn't mentioned it before. He used to tell me these things. I spent that Thanksgiving at my neighbor Celia's house, which was fine and warm and full of her grandchildren. But I sat at that table thinking about Theo's voice and wondering when I'd last heard it. Christmas was supposed to fix everything. Owen had confirmed I was coming. He'd told me, "Dinner's at 4, Mom, come around 3:30. I'd spent 2 weeks shopping and wrapping. A wooden train set for Theo. Books, a cashmere sweater for my son, a gift card and candle set for her because I could never fully read her taste, but I tried. I baked the walnut cookies Owen had loved since childhood. I'd put everything in the car and drove the 40 minutes to their house feeling genuinely hopeful. Their driveway was full when I arrived. I recognized her mother's Subaru, her sister's minivan, a car I didn't know. Through the front window, the lights were glowing and I could hear music. I carried the biggest bag to the door and rang the bell. She answered. She was wearing a red dress and earrings and the expression of someone who's been dreading an interruption. She didn't say, "Merry Christmas." She looked at the bags in my hands and then at my face, and she said, "We didn't set a place for you. This is immediate family." I waited for her to laugh. To say, "Just kidding. Come in, it's freezing." She didn't move. "Owen told me 4 o'clock, I said. Owen should have clarified. Her voice was flat. Not angry exactly, just closed. Her family is here. It's not a good time. Her family, not his, not ours. I stood on that porch in my good coat in 32 degrees and I heard my grandson somewhere inside the house calling out for his daddy. I heard laughter from a room I couldn't see. I stood there long enough to understand that she wasn't going to step aside and that whatever I said next would either make things ugly or make things quiet. I chose quiet. I set the bags down just inside the doorway, against the wall where they wouldn't be in anyone's way. I said, "Tell Owen his mother stopped by." And I walked back to my car. I did not cry on the drive home. I was too busy trying to understand what had just happened. I replayed her words the whole 40 minutes. Immediate family, as if I were a distant acquaintance, as if I hadn't held that woman's newborn son while she slept, as if $40,000 had never exchanged hands, as if Carl hadn't walked Owen down the aisle at that wedding. When I got home, I sat in my kitchen with my coat still on. The house was quiet, the way it gets quiet on holidays when you're a widow. A particular silence, specific and heavy. I made tea. I didn't drink. And then I did something I'd never done before. I opened my laptop and went through every bank transfer I'd made in the past 3 years. The down payment, $40,000. The car loan cosign, $18,000. Theo's preschool tuition when they had a hard quarter, $6,000. Birthday money, holiday money. The time Owen called and said they were short on rent after a plumbing disaster, and I transferred $3,000 within an hour because that's what you do for your child. Over 3 years, nearly $70,000 gone from my savings to their life. And I was standing on their porch on Christmas, being told I wasn't immediate family. I thought about Carl. He had a phrase he used when I was being too generous with people who didn't deserve it. He'd say, "Marie, love isn't a debt people pay back just because you handed them the invoice." He was right about most things. I didn't sleep well that night. Or the next. On the second day after Christmas, I called my attorney, a woman named, I'll call her my attorney, a sharp woman in her 60s who had handled Carl's estate and knew my finances completely. I told her I needed to come in. She asked if everything was all right. I said, "Not yet, but it will be." I sat across from her desk 2 days later and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always respected about her. When I finished, she asked one question. "What do you want to change?" "I want Owen removed as the primary beneficiary," I said. "I want my estate divided between 3 charitable organizations, the Public Library Foundation in our county, the Cardiac Research Center where Carl was treated, and a children's literacy program I'd volunteered with for 6 years. I want a trust established separately for Theo, managed by a third-party trustee, not his parents. He shouldn't lose his grandmother's love because his parents have lost their way." She drafted everything in one session. I signed before I could second-guess myself. Driving home, I felt something unexpected, not grief, not anger, something closer to clarity. Like a window had been cleaned. Owen called on the 29th. Not to apologize, to ask whether I had any thoughts about contributing to a home renovation they were planning, a new deck and kitchen update. They'd gotten estimates. It would run about $25,000, and they were hoping to find a financial partner. I sat with the phone in my hand and listened to him describe the deck dimensions and the quartz countertops. He sounded like himself. Casual. Warm, even. As if nothing had happened. When he finished, I said, "Owen, your wife turned me away at the door on Christmas." A long pause. "Mom, she said you two had a misunderstanding. She told me I was an immediate family and asked me to leave. She was stressed. Her whole family was there. It wasn't personal. It was personal. I am your mother." Another pause. Then, carefully, "Look, I know she can be a lot sometimes. But she's my wife. And honestly, Mom, you've never really made things easy for her." I asked him what that meant. He said I was overbearing, that I made her feel judged, that I'd never fully respected their home as their space and not mine. Each word came out sounding practiced, like he'd been building to this conversation for months and was finally releasing it. I said, "Owen, I am not going to defend 40 years of loving you, but I want you to know that I'm not going to continue funding a life where I'm turned away at Christmas." He said, "Is this about the renovation?" "Mom, don't make this transactional." I thought about that word, transactional, and who had actually made things that way. "I won't be contributing to the renovation," I said, "and I think we both need some time." He called back twice that evening. I didn't answer. He sent a text that said, "I think we should talk in person before this gets worse." I replied that I agreed and would reach out when I was ready. Then I put my phone on the charger and went to bed at 9 o'clock. They found out about the will 6 days later. I still don't know exactly how. My attorney is discreet and I hadn't told anyone. Owen may have called Carl's old accountant for a reference on something and word got back. However it happened, on New Year's Eve afternoon, their car pulled into my driveway. I watched from the window. She got out first, then Owen. They both looked like they hadn't slept. I opened the door before they knocked. Owen started, "Mom, tell me you didn't change the will." "I did. Without even talking to us? You didn't talk to me before Christmas either. She cut in. This is insane. You're punishing Owen for something I did. How is that fair? I looked at her directly. You made clear I'm not immediate family. I adjusted my estate planning accordingly. Her jaw tightened. You're being spiteful. You're doing this to control us. I'm doing this because I finally stopped pretending things are fine when they aren't. I kept my voice level. Carl had always said I was calm under pressure. He meant it as a compliment. Owen is still my son, but I'm not his bank account. And I'm not your charity case, and I'm not going to be uninvited from my grandson's Christmas and then asked to fund your kitchen renovation. Owen said, Mom, you can't just cut me out. Dad worked for that money. I'm your only child. You're right that your father worked for it. He also taught you better than this. I'd like to think he's not watching right now. That landed. Owen looked at the ground. She said, We'll contest it. You're acting emotionally. Any judge can see that. I had a full competency evaluation last week, I said. I had, quietly, at my physician's suggestion as a precaution. My attorney has documentation of every decision I've made. I welcome any legal challenge you'd like to bring. She looked at me the way people look at someone they've underestimated. Owen tried once more, softer now. Mom, please, can we come inside and just talk? Not today. I need you to leave now. When you're ready to have a real conversation about what happened on Christmas, about what's been happening for months, I'm here, but I won't be pressured. She had turned and was walking back to the car before I finished the sentence. Owen stood there another moment. Something moved across his face, not quite regret, not quite recognition, but something adjacent to both. Then he followed her. I closed the door. That was the hardest moment. Not the Christmas porch, not the phone call. Closing the door on my own son on New Year's Eve while the neighborhood was getting ready to celebrate felt like removing a splinter from somewhere close to the bone. Necessary, terrible. Done. I spent January getting my life in order the way you do after a long overdue storm has passed. I met with a financial advisor who specialized in elder estate protection. She reviewed my accounts and created a new structure that was clear, documented, and legally airtight. She also said something I needed to hear. You were generous to a fault for years. That's not weakness, but you get to stop now. I joined a grief support group at my church. Not for Carl exactly, though he was always part of it, but for the particular grief of losing a child who is still alive. The group leader, a retired social worker, told me in our second session that this kind of estrangement is more common than anyone talks about, that it tends to happen when adult children have married partners who see in-laws as competition rather than resource, that I was not the first mother to sit in that chair feeling like I'd failed a test I didn't know I was taking. I started volunteering again at the county library, where I'd spent 32 years of my career. They put me in the children's section on Thursday afternoons, reading aloud to the 3- and 4-year-olds. Every single week, at least one child would have Carl's forehead or Theo's laugh, and I would read the story all the way through anyway. I took a watercolor class. I was not talented. My instructor said that wasn't the point. I reached out to 3 friends I'd drifted from in the years I'd poured everything into Owen's orbit, Celia next door, and 2 women I'd worked with at the library who had retired around the same time I had. We started meeting for lunch every other week. One of them, who had her own estranged daughter, said to me one afternoon over soup, There's a particular freedom in deciding you're done being someone's option. I wrote that down when I got home. Owen sent an email in February. No greeting. Just, I hope you know that Theo asks about you. I don't know what to tell him. I wrote back, tell him his grandmother loves him and thinks about him every day. I have set money aside specifically for his education and his future, managed separately, so that no matter what happens between us, he is taken care of. When he is old enough to make his own choices about our relationship, I will be here. In the meantime, I am taking care of myself. I don't know if he ever replied. I'd set that email address to a separate folder I checked once a week. In March, I did something that surprised even me. I booked a trip to Scotland. Alone. I'd always wanted to go. Carl and I had talked about it for years and never made it happen. I flew into Edinburgh in early April and spent 10 days walking along cold coasts and sitting in pubs where no one knew my name and talking to strangers who told me their own stories. An 82-year-old woman in Inverness told me she'd cut off 3 of her 4 children at various points and reconciled with 2 of them later on her own terms. "You have to live your life first," she said, "or there's nothing left of you to reconcile with." I came home with photographs and a small watercolor print I'd bought from a shop in Edinburgh, which I hung in Carl's old study above the crafting table I'd finally set up there. The legal threat never materialized. My attorney wrote to their attorney twice, presenting the competency evaluation, the documented financial history, and the paper trail of the Christmas incident, including a text message Owen had sent me the week before Christmas confirming dinner at 4 o'clock. Their attorney stopped responding in April. Owen called in May. I answered. "I think I owe you an apology," he said. He sounded quieter than I'd heard him in years. Like he'd been deflated slowly over several months and was only now noticing it. Christmas was wrong. How she handled it was wrong. How she handled it? I should have said that a long time ago. I asked him if his wife knew he was calling. A pause. "We're working through some things." I didn't ask what that meant. I said, "I appreciate you saying that, Owen. I mean it, but an apology and a repair are different things. I'm not ready for things to go back to the way they were. I don't think they should go back that way." What does that mean? It means if we're going to have a relationship, it has to be built on something real, not on what I can provide and what you can accept. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I don't know how to do that yet." "That's honest," I said. "I can work with honest." We talked for 20 more minutes. It was stilted and careful and nothing like the easy Sunday calls we used to have, but it was a beginning of something I couldn't name yet. When we hung up, I sat on my back porch and watched the yard Carl had landscaped, the lilac bush he'd planted our first spring in the house, which was blooming right on schedule, indifferent to all of it. Theo's birthday fell in June. I mailed him a package, 3 picture books, a small stuffed bear, a card that said, "Grandma loves you to the moon." I didn't expect anything back. 3 days later, my phone showed a video message from an unknown number, my daughter-in-law's new cell. She'd filmed Theo opening the package. He held up the bear and looked directly at the camera and said, "Gamma sent him. His name is Carl." I watched that video 4 times. I did not call. I texted back one word, "Perfect." On Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner for the first time in years. 9 people at my table, Celia and her daughter, 2 women from my library group, a couple from my church who'd lost their son the year before and had nowhere to go, and a young librarian I'd mentored who'd just moved to the area and didn't know anyone. We cooked too much food and opened a very decent bottle of wine and talked until past 10. My dining room hadn't been that full or that loud since Carl was alive. At one point, Celia raised her glass and said, "To Meredith, who decided she was worth fighting for." I looked around that table. People I'd chosen, people who'd chosen me back. None of them were obligated to be there. All of them wanted to be. I thought about the porch, the bags of gifts, the closed door. I thought about Carl saying love isn't a debt people repay just because you handed them the invoice. I thought about that 82-year-old woman in Inverness. And I thought, he was right. She was right, and I am finally right too. Your worth is not determined by how much you give or whether the people you gave everything to ever say thank you. Some of them won't. Some of them can't. The door that closes in your face is not the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of the one that was always meant for you.